Back during the pandemic, Airfix decided it would be a good idea to raise some money for charity by creating a fictional hawk paint scheme. One of the schemes included in the box of this kit was created by the winner of that competition, and proceeds from the sales of these kits were sent to the respective NHS charity. Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minutes, and join me on the workbench today as I do a special double build of these NHS charity hawks from Airfix. For a closer look inside the box at the contents and the detail on the sprue, please take a look at the unboxing video I already made on that topic. In today's video I'm going to focus purely on the build and what it looks like at the end. So without any further ado, let's get stuck straight into it. My first job was to wash the sprues in warm soapy water to remove any mould release or grease or dirt that might be left over from the moulding process. Then, when that was done, I cut all the pieces that I needed from the sprue using my side cutters. I then sanded any rough areas or flash away using a sanding stick until all the parts were prepared. And here I have all of the parts that I'm going to need for the cockpit areas for both aircraft. And I'm going to use Tamiya Extra Thin Cement because I like the way that it flows, and this Revell Contactor Professional because it's got a fine needle applicator. And in the end of these steps I should have a cockpit that looks like this. So let's see how we got there. Well, to start off with, I've got to glue in the two chairs, and then this is followed by gluing in the control columns into their little holes. This is a little fiddly and I use tweezers here to get it right, taking my time of course and making sure not to knock over the parts that are already in place. The next step was to add the control panels. These go into their little slots in the floor there. After this, the rear bulkhead at the back of the cockpit area was installed, and then the front bulkhead, which will help us with the landing gear later. Now it's time to get some paint on the parts. I'm going to use this grey primer on all of the internal cockpit areas and the cockpit assemblies we've just built. This primer should provide a nice base layer for any subsequent layers of paint. Whilst I've got this paint going, I might as well do the pilots and the internal areas of the landing gear. This Vallejo camouflage olive green paint was then mixed up with some Tamiya X28 acrylic thinner. Thinning your paints can help avoid leaving brush strokes as the paint dries and give a better finish. I used this paint on all the padded areas of the pilot and co-pilot seats, using a relatively fine brush to try and avoid getting it in the wrong places. Following this, Vallejo black was used on the headrests and the back areas of the chairs. Not forgetting of course the tops of the control panels, and whilst I've got it out we might as well use it on the boots of the pilots. Now it's time to cut out all the transfers that go on the inside of the cockpit. I soaked them in warm water to help release them from the backing paper, and then I would apply some Decal Fix onto the areas where these transfers were going to go. The Decal Fix acts as a setting solution where it sort of melts them into the surface details and helps them stick onto the plastic a bit better. I do find that Decal Fix is a little bit aggressive and can leave a glossy finish, but at the end it looks something like this, and it's done a reasonably good job. Now let's work on the pilots. This Tamiya XF15 flat flesh was carefully painted onto their faces. Next, this Russian uniform green was used for their overall flight suit colour. I thought it would make a good representation of the kind of pilot overall that is sort of generally worn by pilots. However, in hindsight, looking at the box, it should have been blue because that's the colour they used in the artwork. Anyways, after this, white paint was used to do the helmet and gloves, and then when all the paint was dry, some of this wash was applied to bring out the recessed details. When the pilots were ready, I could scrape away some of the paint from their chairs and try and glue them in place, but as is standard with a lot of kits these days, the pilot doesn't quite fit, so I had to cut his feet off to make sure that he did. When that was done, the cockpit assembly could be glued into place, but I must remember to put in some nose weight. So I've got some scrap wire here, this I think it's like 2mm diameter, which I'm twisting up with an old pair of pliers, and I'm going to wedge it inside of the underneath of the cockpit. A little bit of super glue should hold that in place, along with some pink tack to help bulk it out a bit. Hopefully that'll be enough to stop the aircraft from tail sitting. Now that I've done that, the fuselage halves can be joined together. There are little locating holes which they sort of snap together a little bit, and then the Tamiya extra thin cement was run along the seams. The next step is to install this hood part, which I've already painted black, and then this was followed by painting the dashboard area at the front of the cockpit with the same black paint. This component that goes over the back of the cockpit can then be glued into place as well. And this is followed by the installation of the nozzle at the back of the jet engine. The air intakes come in two halves and they need to be joined together, and when that's done they can be glued onto the side of the model, making sure to put them on the correct sides. The upper and lower wing components can then be joined together, and then these little spoiler type things are glued into their slots in the bottom of the wings. I'm not entirely sure what they are or what they do on the real aircraft, so if you know, let me know down in the comments. I'd be interested to find out. Anyways, after these little parts have all been added into their slots, it was time to move on to something a little bit more exciting, and that is joining the fuselage finally with these wings. Some more of the Tamiya extra thin cement was applied to this area, and then it was carefully lined up and snapped into place. The next step is to repeat the process, but this time with the tail surfaces, which go into their slots on the back of the model. There is an air brake which can be positioned open or closed, I'm pretty sure, but I decided to put it in the closed position. This was then followed by adding on the little side fins that go in the slots either side of this air brake. Humbrol Clear Fix is a glue that I like to use for clear parts because it dries clear. I'm using it here to put this little clear bulkhead thing into place. I then went round the edges of the bulkhead with this Vallejo white paint. I did make a bit of a mess though when I was painting it, so I ended up cleaning up the areas I didn't want it with a cotton bud soaked in acrylic thinners until I had a nice clean edge. And with that, it's time to mask up the canopies. I used my normal method, which is to stick on some masking tape and then cut around the edges until I've got some canopies that look a bit like this. Again, these were glued onto the model using the Humbrol Clear Fix, which hopefully should dry clear and strong and prevent the canopies from falling off. I've been looking for a good white spray paint, and I decided for this build that I would try the Revell one. I actually bought 2 cans of this paint for this task, and whilst I have to admit it does work, I'm not sure it is the best white spray paint out there. Painting things in white is inherently quite a difficult task, and for the money I'm not sure that this was the best solution, but it did work. As a side note, I used the actual landing gear covers to mask the landing gear bays, as they should remain in the grey primer colour. I then proceeded to finish off with painting the rest of the small details in the white paint as well, and then when that was done I masked up the models so that they could receive their respective paint schemes. And for the blue of these paint schemes I decided to use this UK Azure Blue from the Model Air range from Vallejo. And actually I was really impressed with this colour. I thought it had a very good pigment density and it flowed really well through the airbrush. So this was applied carefully to all of the areas which were meant to receive this colour, and then when it was dry after a couple of thin coats I carefully removed all of the masking tape to reveal the finished paint schemes. This Vallejo gloss varnish was then loaded into the airbrush and sprayed over both models. This will create a base layer for the transfers which I'm about to apply, and a nice smooth glossy surface should prevent them from silvering. And speaking of the transfers, it's time now to cut them into more manageable parts, making sure that I apply the ones I want at the right time and making it just a little bit easier. These transfers were then soaked in warm water to help release them from the backing paper. And I'm not going to lie, these cartograph transfers are amazing, and the paint schemes that Airfix have chosen for this are a massive test of their printing skill. Micro Set is going to be used as a setting solution in this build, and it was applied to the model before the transfers and should help them settle into the details and look as if they are painted on rather than just stickers. And to be honest, I didn't actually have any real issues with the application of the transfers. They all went on relatively well and settled into the details quite nicely, even the ones on the bottom where they've got to go around those sort of spoiler things. There is one transfer that I do need to talk about though, and that's this one on the nose. The rainbow stripes on the nose of this one are too long, and I think that's because you're supposed to apply them before you glue in the air intake on the side of the model. So to solve this problem, I decided it would be much easier to just cut the transfer to the correct length and then reapply it. And whilst the rainbow doesn't go all the way up behind the air intake, I feel like this is a good solution, seeing as it doesn't say in the instructions anywhere that this is something you might have to do. Anyway, with that done, some Micro Sol, which is in the red bottle, was then applied on top of all of the transfers when they've cured a little bit to help seal them in and melt them down onto all those surface details. The gloss varnish from earlier was then again loaded back into the airbrush and sprayed over the models to help seal in those transfers. I thought that a nice glossy finish to the model would be quite attractive, and it should bring out a uniform finish. When all of the paint was dry, I removed the landing gear covers, which were acting as masks for the landing gear bays. And then the landing gear legs could be glued into their holes, along with the various little struts which help support the landing gear legs when they are in the lowered position. You can display this model in flight if you would prefer, but I thought it would be nice to display it with the wheels down. And speaking of the wheels, it's time to paint them with black paint. So with a fine brush, I applied this paint very carefully to the tyres, as well as some of the other smaller details which were on the models or not yet applied and awaiting their chance to be stuck on. The wheels, when dry, could then be added onto the landing gear legs, and the nose wheels very carefully positioned inside of the front bay and pushed into place. The side doors on the nose could then carefully be glued into their slots. I need to use a little bit more of the blue paint from earlier on the actual landing gear covers that I'm going to use. See the ones in the middle, those are the ones which are for the in-flight display, whereas the ones on the outside are for when it's displayed with the wheels up. So I pretty much just copied how they looked and then glued them into place. Next up, some silver was used to paint the front area on the nose where the landing light is going to go. I used a very fine brush to carefully apply this to this area. When this was done, the probe, which goes into the little hole just above the landing light, was glued into place as well. I left this until now because it's quite fiddly and I was worried I might break it off. And then I decided that I would paint it whilst it was in position because, again, being quite small, it would be difficult to paint it without something to hold it. Gunmetal grey was then used to carefully paint the exhaust nozzle for the jet engine. Humbrol Clear Fix was then used to glue the landing light clear part into place on the nose of the aircraft. And with that, it's time to remove the masking tape on the canopy because we are almost finished. And the masking tape seems to have done quite a good job of leaving those canopy lines in place. But you can see I've got some weird sort of speckling effect around the edges of the frames, and I'm not entirely sure where that has come from. I think it might be a reaction with the Revell spray paint, the white paint that I used earlier. I wonder if it's sort of soaked through and reacted with the plastic, and it's a bit unsightly. So to try and mitigate this, I sanded the area down with some fine grit sandpaper and then decided to gloss paint over the top. So the gloss varnish I've been using throughout this build was brought back out and applied pretty much neat to the top of the canopy to try and hide those marks. But if I'm honest, this was pretty much the only rescue I could think of. And I'm a little bit disappointed that the plastic has reacted in such a way. But anyways, with that, my build is now complete. So, what do I think of these kits? Well, on the whole, they're not that difficult to assemble. And seeing as it's for charity, it's not a bad idea. Being fictional paint schemes as well, it doesn't really matter what you do with them, seeing as there's no real reference for them. So feel free to go absolutely wild with them. I do think that the paint schemes chosen look very attractive, particularly the competition winners one, as it seems to have a lot more colour and vibrancy to it. And if you don't know, the one that the competition winner designed is the one with the NHS Charities together, rainbow and the RAF roundels on it, rather than the Airfix logo. The Airfix logo was done by the Airfix designers. They are quite similar, but they are different enough. As I said earlier, those transfers are absolutely amazing, and I think they're a great example of how good Cartograph can be. The kits were relatively easy to assemble, the details are quite good, and I didn't really encounter any real problems with the build other than those transfers being a little bit too long and the instructions not telling me that I needed to put them in behind the air intake before I add the air intake onto the model. Another thing that I was disappointed about was that weird reaction that I think the paint had with the canopy and caused it to sort of blister. I tried my best to fix it and I'm not entirely sure what else I could have done, so if you know, let me know down in the comments if there's a better solution to the problem I had. And you know, additionally, just let me know, am I right? Was it the paint that sort of reacted with the plastic, or was there something else I did that I didn't realise? Talking about the kit as a product though, you can expect to spend £16.50 on this, as that's the recommended retail price from Airfix. Yes, it does seem a little bit expensive, and you do only get the one kit inside of the box, despite the fact obviously I've built two kits in this video. I did go and buy two boxes to build two kits. But yeah, so £16.50 for one model does seem a little bit sharp, but then you are paying for that sort of charity donation sort of element as well, which, you know, a lot of people can sort of justify doing. If I was buying this just as a kit though, the sort of number of parts and the quality of the product, I'd probably be hoping to spend around the £10 mark. And speaking about the kit, it was tooled back in 2012, so it's not one of the most recent kits in the Airfix range, but it is still up to modern standards and it is fairly good. However, I would have liked to have seen a second pilot inside the cockpit, seeing as there are two seats, and I'm not entirely sure why there is only one. But anyways, I think it's time to wrap this one up here. The Hawk model kit from Airfix is one of those kits that's been in the range for quite a long time and features many of the modern aspects of an Airfix kit. This kit in particular is a good demonstration of the quality that Cartograph decals can provide, whilst also raising funds for a good cause. There are a few little issues with the kit that I would like to have seen improved in future releases, but on the whole this is a model which could be done as a weekend build. Let me know down in the comments what you think of my build and whether you think my review was fair. As always, a quick shout out to my channel members and patrons for their extra support. Massive thanks to these guys on screen. And if you'd like to find out more about how you can get involved, take a look at the link in the description. Whilst you're underneath the video, dropping a like if you enjoyed this video would be greatly appreciated, and subbing to the channel so you never miss a modelling upload would make me very grateful. Finally, I think the last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.